So no lie, I've probably like started, stop this video like 4 times. And it's because this video is a really interesting one when I start thinking about it and conceptualizing it, because I want to talk about finding your calling. And so much of finding our calling is both written in our astrology chart and kind of a game of happenstance. And it's so much like our spiritual awakening. Like, none of us ever know that our spiritual awakening is happening. We just know that it's happened after the fact. It's something that we look back at and we're like, holy, insert expletive here, things are shifting. I can feel my clairs developing. I can sense the energy around me. I can read the strings of reality. I have this knowing, this kind of precognition, and I have all of these amazing things just starting to fall into place for me. And I'm hitting all of this like energetic awareness, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it or where to go with it, but I know that there's something there. And so many of us, when we start to go through this spiritual awakening, we start to go through the process of trying to figure out, well, if I am this spiritual being, what am I meant to do in this life? And we all start kind of gravitating towards this question of what is my calling? What is my purpose? And a lot of times purpose is just a fancy way of saying, how do I give my life meaning? And how do I apply this meaning to my spiritual awakening? And so when we start looking at purpose and giving our spiritual awakening meaning, that's when we start looking for how to apply it to our lives. And so many of us start to take that application and turn it into running a spiritually based business, trying to work for ourselves because we're realizing that the 9-to-5 kind of information and grind just isn't in alignment with who we know we are. And as we start looking at that and we start trying to dig through it all, sometimes we just get lost in the sauce. So let's kind of take a moment to break that down. So let's talk spiritual awakenings for a minute, because I think this is where we start to realize that things in our life aren't necessarily in alignment with what we want to do. When we talk about our spiritual awakening, we often talk about like this spontaneous knowing, this spontaneous rise of energy in our bodies, this kind of stepping into our healing journey. And like I said earlier, we don't realize we're going through a spiritual awakening until we have time to reflect on it. Sometimes months, if not years later. Like when I went through my spiritual awakening, I didn't know that's what it was. I was just trying to find a way to like go from just surviving to thriving. And it turned into me stepping into learning energy work, learning, quantum healing, learning hypnosis, learning astrology, learning all of these things that have started to make me who I am and have helped me align my life in a way that I never would have thought possible when I started my awakening. Heck, even when I started my awakening, it was just a matter of, how am I supposed to stay on this earth? How am I supposed to stay on this planet? And so when I start looking at that, when I look at that in people's charts, a lot of times I find their spiritual awakening either in the house that houses Aquarius, in their house that houses Pisces, or even just in their Saturn return, because that's going to give you a whole bunch of stuff. Because when we look at our Saturn return, that's literally Saturn saying, what are your limitations? What are the boundaries? What are your goals? And are you achieving them? And Saturn just kind of knocks you over the head and says, okay, let's fucking go here. And so when we start looking at these particular experiences, when we look at our spiritual awakening, we go, okay, now that I've gone through it, how do I help someone else through it? And so this is where we go, where do I find my purpose? And a lot of us will go to an astrologer and we'll have them tell us about our North Node, but our calling is so much deeper than that. Our calling is legitimately stepping into alignment with our higher purpose time and time again, and doing this dance of alignment and unalignment and alignment and unalignment and becoming aligned and disaligned, and doing this dance of, am I listening to my intuition or am I listening to my ego? And too often we end up thinking we're listening to our intuition, but we're listening to our ego. And so we'll go to these coaches and these gurus and these shamans and all of these people we think have the answers outside of us. And they'll tell us, yes, this is the path. This is the way, right? They'll show us the ways that maybe we could be in alignment with our lives, the way they've found alignment, and, the way that they've helped people find alignment. But as we go through that, we discover more and more often that that's not where we're aligned. So we go through our spiritual awakening, we start asking these questions about our calling, and we start working with all these people, and then we start to take a moment to step back and realize what we think is our calling based on what we've heard from coach after coach after coach isn't actually our calling. Turns out our calling comes around in what I call our paradigm shift. It comes around in us realizing that the way that someone else is doing something doesn't align with who we are and doesn't align with the way that the world is shifting. So we start to change the world around it. Like, I can honestly say I have so much appreciation for the coaches I used to work with, and so much gratitude, even though we didn't part on good terms. I have so much gratitude for that experience because it pushed me into my paradigm awakening, where I was able to step back and realize that the way that the metaphysic industry that I had been taking a part in was working didn't work for me. And now I actually get to step forward and say, hey, here's the way we can start to shift things. So our paradigm awakening is where we start to find our calling. It's where we start to find the alignment of what we want to find in our business. And very often, this is where we find our 10th house. This is where we find our midheaven. This is where we find the embodiment of our rising sign and the alignment with our sun sign. This is where we actually step into our alignment and knowing, rather than relying on the expertise of a spiritual coach. So how do we find our calling? Well, when we start to go through this paradigm shift, we start to ask ourselves different questions. We start to break down what it is that we want to see shifted in this metaphysical realm, in the way we talk about things, right? If we are someone who is traditionally into energy healing, how do we shift the way people look at energy healing? How do we actually acknowledge the role trauma plays? How do we acknowledge how to move forward and set goals that are truly in alignment? And how do we find the modality that flows from our energy? Well, we start to find it by looking more closely at our chart. We start to look at our first house, the house of ego, self-expression, and things like that, and the energy of our rising sign. And we say, okay, this is the energy that is truly what my higher self is asking me to embody. This is the energy of how the world will see me and how I want to be understood. Cool. How do I take that a step further? And then we start working with the energy of our North Node, and we weave that in. And as we connect with that energy of our North Node, we start to realize that our destiny path is one of alignment with not just our North Node, but our rising sign. And then we go, okay, let's take this a step further. How do I turn this into a career? How do I start to live my passion? And then we step into our 10th house. And so we find our calling not all at once, but in a series of events that align us with different energies across our chart. So we find the alignment with who we are first, and then we find the alignment with what we want to become, and then we find the alignment with how we want to support other people. And that's how we find our calling. We don't find it by going to a coach and having them give us reading after reading to confirm to us that our intuition isn't leading us astray. We find it by trusting ourselves and stepping into the adventure and the fucking amazingness that is following our intuition and our understanding of the energy behind us. And so I want to leave you with this. If you are someone who is going through this paradigm awakening and you are trying to figure out your next step, instead of booking an astrologer, instead of asking someone else to give you the answers and the keys to the kingdom, what would happen if you take the keys and unlock them yourself? What would happen if you booked a call with someone who's going to look at you and say, I don't have the answers, but your chart does. Let's dive in. What would it look like for you to just pull your own cards, for you to listen to your own intuition and take a step in that direction? Because chances are you already know your calling. You've just been hiding from it.